Speaking of the White House, honored to have my next guest, the chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors, Jared Bernstein. You know, Jared, I understand your frustration sometimes when you look at the data and Americans don't buy the data, but they really don't buy the president telling them that they're essentially wrong. It's not that bad. So how do you navigate that?
Well, that's not at all what the president tells them. And in fact, yesterday, if you look at his statement, which is on the White House website, on the inflation report, we got a very favorable report from the perspective of the markets today, as you have been reporting correctly. But he pointed out, I think one of his first sentences is, we know families are still struggling with prices that are too high. I mean, this is practically a quote from his statement yesterday. Never will this president blow off the struggles that families like the one he grew up in are going through. Instead, he'll take action to help them through cutting costs, prescription drug, clean energy, housing, child care, junk fees, actively working to lower costs in those areas. So not at all dismissive of America's concerns in that regard, Neil.
All right, well, some might disagree with you on that, but I do want to get behind why the president keeps claiming this. This is what talking about inflation. Take a look.
We have dramatically reduced inflation from 9% down to close to 3%. We're in a situation where we're better situated than we were when we took office. It was 9% when I came to office, 9%. But look, people have a right to be concerned. I think inflation has gone slightly up. It was at 9% when I came in, and it's now down around 3%.
Jared, why does he keep saying that? You're his top you're the head of the Council of Economic Advisors. Do you ever whisper in his ear, Mr. President, just to be technical about it, it wasn't 9% when you assumed office, it was 1.4%. It got as high as 9% in 2022. You brought it down from that, but it was never, ever, ever 9% when you came into office. So why does he keep saying it?
Well, first of all, let me point out that in that very quote you played, the president talked about how concerned he was for households struggling with prices that he consistently characterizes as too high.
That's not what I asked you.
So
why does he keep misrepresenting this?
He's making the point that the factors that caused inflation to climb to 9% were in place when he took office.
No, that's not what he said. He said it was at 9%. It would eventually get to 9% a little over a year after that. But the fact of the matter is it wasn't 9%. So if I can't trust him quoting data in real time, why should I believe what he's talking about now?
So the annual growth in core inflation in the second quarter of 21 was, in fact, about 9%. And his point about inflation down 60% off its peak is very much the case. So
no, it wasn't. It was not at that. So you're almost as bad as he is. Why can't you just say it was high, it got as high as 9%? You'd be accurate in saying that. And we have now brought it down and we're struggling in around the 3% area. But it's better than it was. But instead, to hang it on his predecessor, that you inherited something that was through the roof when we were in the middle of COVID, it just seems to the American people, whether you're Republican or Democrat, you're lying. Neil. You're just lying.
Well, hold on. I hear you. The president was making the point that I think is unequivocally true. The factors that took inflation to 9% were in place when he took office.
That is not what he said, Jared. And you're a very smart guy with this stuff. You could just whisper. He's a good friend of yours, obviously, thinks the world of you. Many others do as well. You could have just told him, Chief, I got to tell you, Mr. President, whatever you say, you might even, in fact, call him Joe. That's how close you are. And say, sir, it was not 9%. Stop it with the 9%, because the more you say that, the more people don't believe what you're saying.
Look, I think what the American people care most about is the fact that inflation.
The American people care about truth, Jared.
Hold on, Neil. Neil, this only works if you let me talk, okay?
You haven't answered my question. I've asked it 5 times, five ways.
The president was making the point that the factors that caused inflation were in place when he took office, and that's unequivocally true.
Right.
I take your point, and we can have we can go on all day back and forth on this. I think what matters today is, are we making progress on lowering costs as well as lowering inflation? You know, they're not the same thing. Lowering both inflation and costs on behalf of the American people. I think we saw a great CPI report yesterday in that regard, but that's just one data point. No victory laps, no getting too far over the skis there.
The trend is your friend, and other economists agree with you that it looks like it could be, and the Federal Reserve might have some flexibility to cut rates.
Correct.
I had a guest on, you might have heard earlier, Jared, who was saying that would be a mistake. It would be a little too soon to start cutting rates. How do you feel about that?
I'm not going to talk about Federal Reserve monetary policy in that regard. What I will say is that the Fed and Jerome Powell has consistently said he needs to have more faith in his forecast, and I suspect he's not the only one. I think a report like yesterday's on the CPA is a data point that helps in that regard, but we'll have to listen to the Fed on that point.
So let me ask you about some of these, and they could be welcome developments. The markets certainly like it, to your point, because, a slowdown is better than things heating up. We've seen in the retail inflation report, we've seen in retail sales, we've seen it in job gains slowing off what was a blistering pace. We've also seen it factory output, which is pretty flat right now. Are you worried now? This sounds like a 180 that we could be looking at stagflation here, that things are slowing down, prices are still high. Are you worried about that?
Well, the question to a chair of the CEA is, are you worried about something? I worry about everything. There's a banana peel everywhere you step.
Yeah.
Stagflation is very low on my list for the following reason. First of all, you know that the labor market has been consistently tight with unemployment below 4% for well over 2 years. That's helping to generate real wage gains. And by the way, all the disinflation we've had is really important in that regard. So we now have year-over-year wage growth for middle wage workers for 14 months in a row. Now that's the kind of tailwind from the job market that helps support consumer spending, 70% of our economy, and it's been just a very positive perpetual motion machine in terms of growth rates. Look, GDP
but
continues.
it hasn't been a perpetual machine, right? I mean, rent growth right now is outstripping job surges in most of the U.S. metro areas, right? So there is a flip side.
Well, I'm not
to
sure. I'm not exactly sure what point you're making there. I mean, I think the key point
is that
there
the
is
cost of the American people, what they're enduring, isn't keeping up. Is exceeding what they're earning. You're right; their earnings are going up. They are experiencing these gains, but in real terms, they are not.
So we have a factual disagreement. True or
no,
false?
I didn't make up the fact that rent growth is outstripping wage gains in most of the U.S.
Let me
metro
ask you a
areas.
question. I know you're supposed to ask me a question. I'm asking you a question. On a year-over-year basis, has wage growth been beating price growth?
No.
Wrong.
No, it hasn't.
Okay.
So when I give you this, when I talk about rent growth and grocery and related food costs that are exceeding wage gains, are you saying I just made that up? I'm reading from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Is that under your control too?
So on a year-over-year basis, wages of middle wage workers went up 0.6% over the past year. I'll put this on Twitter when I get out of here. So that's a fact. And in fact, on a year-over-year basis, wages have been beating prices for, I believe, 14 months running. But I'll make sure that's right when I get back to my office. That's unequivocally
all right,
true.
On the rent thing and the fact that food costs, related costs, are exceeding the wage growth that Americans are saying. You're saying that is not happening, that Americans' wages are... Americans, you're saying, I want to be clear, is exceeding whatever their costs are that they're enduring, because they would have something else to tell you.
I'm not making a claim here. This is just a factual point that wage growth on a yearly basis is beating price growth and has been for middle wage workers for 14 months in a row. Now, let's talk about groceries.
The core costs that Americans endure. You're saying, wait a minute, no, just to be clear,
I have another
you're
question
saying
for you.
that that is not exceeding what they are making, because Americans are telling you otherwise.
I don't know how else to say what I've said. I've been unequivocally clear.
They have stopped buying a number of items precisely because of that. You're saying, it's not that bad. You almost sound like you're saying, let them eat cake.
No.
Here's the problem. They can't afford the cake.
I started this interview by quoting the president saying that we know families are struggling with high prices, and that's why our top priority is not just reducing inflation,
the
it's reducing costs.
Dismisses it. Only lately has the president acknowledged that, there might be a price problem.
Let me ask you a question, very important question for you, okay? Here is grocery price inflation for the last 3 months. Grocery price inflation, 0%, 0%, negative 0.2%. That's the last 3 months of grocery price inflation. My question for you:
but those costs are still up.
Have you done a story about this?
I most certainly have.
Have you done a story about this?
We've talked about the slowing price trend.
Have you done a story on the decline in grocery prices in the past 3 months?
You're talking about the rate of increase
negative 0.2.
No. You're talking about something over the last few months where the rate of increase has slowed. You're not talking about the food gains. You're not talking about the gas gains that are up double digit. So you're isolating a 3-month period where it held its own. please get this. This is an important point. I don't mean to besmirch you,
Okay.
Jared.
I'm listening.
You've got to acknowledge that when you make a big deal of prices that stop surging or hold their own after they have gone up at a double-digit rate, and you crow about that as progress, hallelujah. But for people going to the grocery store and still experience prices that are now a lot higher than they used to
Right.
be, you're saying, essentially, you're imagining it. They're not imagining it.
No, they're not imagining it at all, and that's why I
So you're
started this
saying
interview.
celebrate the last
Neil,
3
please,
months.
Please,
You're saying
Neil,
celebrate
please.
the
I
last
listened
3
to you.
months, right?
Now you have to
Go
listen
ahead,
to me.
Go ahead.
Thank you. I started this interview by quoting the President of the United States saying, and I quote, "We know that families are still struggling with prices that are too high, and therefore our top agenda is to lower costs in the area
Why
of junk
should I
fees,
believe it? Why should I
healthcare."
believe it, Jared? If he's saying
Because
that,
it's on the
when
record,
he
because
doesn't
people are-
even accurately talk about what inflation was when he took office. So why should I believe what he says now when he doesn't even know what's been happening with
because it's
inflation
true.
since he took
Look
office?
at what he's done on junk fees. Go put a microphone in somebody who's now paying $35 for insulin. Go put a microphone in somebody who is paying lower prescription drug costs because of legislation this president passed. Go put a microphone in somebody who's benefited from getting rid of some of the airline junk
Why
fees.
don't
that,
you put a
this
microphone on
president has
someone who's paying more
Because I
for
don't have a
chutney,
news station.
who's paying more for
You
Italian
do.
sausage, who's paying more for seal? The
I'm
Italian
not a
sausage
news
that really
station,
bugs
Neil.
me.
You're a news station.
But
Start
you're picking and
reporting the
choosing and
news.
cherry picking the data that supports your view that inflation is what
How am
when
I
it's
cherry
not.
picking the data? How am I started this interview talking about people struggling with prices that are too high. I then told you a fact that apparently you're not getting, which is that wages are beating prices on a yearly basis.
It's the
I
president
will
who's
make that
not
case
getting
all
the
day long.
inflation thing, right? I mean, the president is the one who keeps saying inflation was at 9% when I took office. Now, a
Okay, so
president
now
who
I'm
says
afraid-
that, no, because this gets to the integral part of the problem. If the president can't get his facts right on that, why am I going to believe anything he says about what's going on now?
When the president says that families are struggling with prices that are too high and that he has an aggressive agenda to address that, you should listen to him to the extent that he can prove that he is implementing that agenda. So let me talk about that. When it comes to the cost of insulin, when it comes to the cost of prescription drugs, he has passed legislation that has lowered those costs. When it comes to junk fees in entertainment, in airfares, in banking, in credit cards, he has actively lowered costs in those areas. That is
that
on
what
the
you're hanging
books.
your hat on? Your junk fees come down, insulin
I'm
price,
answering your
all that's
question.
positive development. I
When the
grant you.
president,
But when the president talks about that,
Neil,
it
hold on a second.
doesn't get the big number.
Let me finish.
You're in big trouble.
Let me finish. Go back a year or two and look at what grocery prices were doing. They were growing double digit, okay? For the last 3 months, they've been 0 or negative. That is not a victory lap, to come to your question. Our fight is not over. People are still paying too much. So I want to just be
That's when we were
incredibly
paying the
unequivocal.
9%. That's when you were at
Unequivocal about
9%,
that.
and we're down
but
from
I
that.
think that if groceries were up 3 months in a row, I suspect you would have done a story about that. The fact that they're flat or down 3 months in a row, I'd urge you to elevate that as well.
They got to reverse, right? You got to reverse. If you're up 9, 10, 11, 12%,
That's not how
it's not one thing to hold at those levels. You got to start bringing those levels down in reverse. Right?
And you're right, and that's an important part of the story, one that you should tell.
All right, we will, and I'd love to have you back. But
Thank
Jared,
you.
I don't know. Maybe you could talk to the president about the 9% thing. We could be off to the races. But it's always good having you.
Nice to talk to you, Dan.
All right, Jared Bernstein on that. All right, I apologize if I got a little overheated. It is lunchtime, and it's an expensive lunch.